Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. And welcome to another Coffee Break Chat. I'm your host, James Jackson, he, they pronouns, executive producer, Light Thief Productions. We've got an interesting show for you today. It's the last show before the Democratic primary here in Philadelphia. So the Democratic primary happens next Tuesday. Get out and vote if you're a registered Democrat or Republican. If you're registered to vote in either party, you can participate in that party's primary next Tuesday and decide who you'd like to see in office. Because here in Philadelphia, the general consensus is that whoever wins the Democratic primary wins the general election, and that's the way it goes. We'll see. Well, we have had candidates surprise us. We've had candidates, win when they had no chance at this stage of the election. And we haven't actually heard anything from those that aren't running in the Democratic primary. We've only heard things from Democratic primary candidates. All the polling, even the polling by their opponents, puts Hellingem and Rebecca Reihart neck and neck with each other, but with a large undecided margin in the 20s. This is all within the possible errors of the polling, the percentage of the polling, and so it's going to be an interesting primary. It's gonna be an interesting vote to follow, and we'll follow up on this on Wednesday. We may not even have a full vote count by the time we go live next Wednesday, but we'll at least see what the lay of the land is, where people are coming down. That large undecided vote, for a large part, is in the Black community. Uh, Over 60%, I believe, of the Black community polled is still undecided, as of reporting a few weeks ago. And it's interesting that the Black community isn't sure who to vote for. Um, I personally think that's because this election, once again, as many elections do in Philadelphia, has a race problem. Uh, the only black woman, and with black true root in black community support, the only person who is running that was born and raised in Philadelphia and has experienced all of the ups and downs of Philadelphia is Cheryl Parker. Cheryl Parker is the only black woman candidate, and unfortunately, the two candidates that are other two candidates in the Democratic Party, um, just don't have those connections to the community that Cheryl Parker has. Um, I don't know how to make that better. I don't know how, if that is a problem. Um, I do know that is probably why we have such an undecided vote. Um, we wouldn't have quite that level of undecideds if there were several viable black candidates. But we are where we are. Helen Gim has a lot of black support. Um, and support from Black activists, support from the progressive community, which is majority Black, and besides that, we see, Rebecca Reihart not having as much support in that community because her policies, on the face of them, are uh, not progressive. They're not in line with the progressive community, and her public statements don't seem to be in line with the progressive community either. Um, that could be problematic. As we've said several times on this show, we had endorsed Rebecca Reihart as far as who we thought would be a good candidate to vote for. Um, Unfortunately, recent policy decisions and decisions by her campaign and campaign statements seem to push in the opposite direction of the reasons why we said Rebecca Reihart would be a good candidate. Rebecca Reihart's candidacy is predicated on knowing her past work as a comptroller, her past work as somebody who looks into what's wrong with the city and how it's being run, and proposes solutions. Her solutions proposals as comptroller were always very evidence based, followed, the latest um, in science, for instance, her policies and proposals to revamp the police department are very logical and executable in order to revamp the police department, which is a campaign promise by Gim's campaign as well. But in order to do that, you need to get any changes that you want through the very powerful FOP. The FOP in the city of Philadelphia basically runs the police department. It's not a question of if you want to do something as a candidate, as mayor, you can just do it. You have to work with people like the FOP in order to get those things done. The FOP is very powerful because the entirety of the Philadelphia police operation is staffed by FOP members. In order to become a police officer, you become a member of the FOP. In order to work in anything in the police department, you must be a member of the FOP. Reihart's main idea behind revamping the police department is to take a lot of that power out of the hands of the FOP, and the way she would do that is by actually, making the department, the jobs done in the department more civilian where they need to be civilian. So, for example, there are people in the police department that deliver interdepartmental mail. Currently, those are sworn police officers, but there's no need for that. There's no need for them to be sworn police officers in order to just deliver mail. And it's kind of ridiculous that they are sworn police officers to do that simple of a job. There's other examples. Even secretarial things are done by sworn police officers. There's the people who restock filing the office supplies are police officers. People who do work in the Philadelphia Police Department in any of the precincts are all police officers, and there's no reason for them to be. So the one of the areas of waste that would be removed under a Reihart mayorship would be that she would revamp the police department in that sort of way. That's something that the FOP doesn't actually have any say over. So it's actionable. And it also reduces the power of the FOP because there are now less members of the FOP working in the police department. Police jobs can still get done, police department jobs can still get done without the participation of FOP members. So when you have a problem like the current situation where FOP members have basically decided to not do their jobs as well as they could, you have other people in the police department still doing their jobs. So things like cars that are abandoned and getting towed still happen. So things that like permits getting issued and permit signs being given to the public still happen. Things like citations can still happen, and that's the important part. Um, we do have we'll be talking a little bit more about this with our special guest Timothy Reimer, and Timothy's on in the green room, but he's actually participating in the art commission hearing on the golf course, so he's a little bit distracted right at the moment. So we'll have him on a little bit later. Um, so as I was saying, I think that like this is an important part of the election. If you review everybody's public information on what they intend to do as mayor, which is the most reliable indicator of what somebody actually will do as mayor, is what their policy statements are, is especially their written policy statements. Their public speaking may be bad, they're or off the cuff, or may not follow exactly what they have written. But generally, if you review historically, uh, campaign promises that are written down and on people's campaign pages, or platform releases, they tend to follow those more closely than whatever they say. So reviewing what Helen Gim has to say on public safety, she makes the same plan essentially as Rebecca Reihart. Um, Sherelle Parker's plan is entirely different. Sherelle Parker's plan would be to reinstate um, stop and frisk, allowing stop and frisk in cases where there's a suspected crime. Um, Her platform also, freely gives more money to the police, more money to the police department, which would only further strengthen and embolden the FOP. Um, I don't know if it's silly of me, but the problem, one of the main problems in the city of Philadelphia is that we have this very strong, basically secondary government. We have the government that we all voted for, and then we have the FOP, which does what it wants, and regardless of the people that we elected to ask them to do things. Um, that that's problematic in my opinion. It causes problems like the current situation where the police force disagrees with the way the district attorney's office is being run, and therefore they have decided that they're not going to pursue certain crimes or certain criminals, or um, attempt to have those crimes prosecuted, because they in their way of saying that they're not prosecuted. They say that the district attorney's office releases those criminals. I find that a very questionable reading of the reality, but we'll go with that. So they've decided that since they can't get these criminals prosecuted, they all get released, whatever. We're not going to do our jobs. We're not going to arrest anybody. We're not going to try and break up fights. We're not going to issue citations. We're just going to allow, crime to happen, and we're going to investigate afterwards as best we can. But it's going to take us a long time. Our resolve rate's going to go down. Our arrest rate's going to go down, etc., etc. And the whole time we're going to point the finger at the DA's office. That's not, the community voted for a district attorney that's progressive and that wants to reform policing, wants to reform the judicial system, wants to reform how crime is treated. Because the district attorney looked into, the state of the art for what criminology is, and knows that, the methodologies that were in existence weren't working. So the district attorney decided, hey, I'm going to run on this platform. And enough people in Philadelphia voted for it that's the platform we have now. It's got to take time to take effect, but it also needs the cooperation of all the other departments that are involved in it. That's the mayor's office, and that's the police department. If the police department's unwilling to help with this modernization, to help with these efforts to make crime go down, but in a way that is that will help in the future lowering of crime rates, if they're unwilling to do that, then having only one department working on this effort isn't going to be effective. I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I think that everybody knows that. I think that that's why Larry Krasner won his second term so handily as district attorney. I expect fully that he'll probably win another term as district attorney very handily, because the citizens of Philadelphia are not stupid, especially the voting citizens of Philadelphia, and they realize that there's things that need to happen with regard to criminal justice reform. So they voted for it, and now they're trying to hope it works out. Our next mayor will likely be participating in that, unless it's Sherelle Parker. The public statements on safety and police reform by both the Reihart and Gim campaigns are practically identical. I find it annoying that a lot of people that I know see a difference. If you compare them side by side, they use the same wording, and if you break down their sentences to generalizations, they're the same general feel. They talk about deploying police officers to high priorities, retraining around community policing. They talk about ensuring benefit programs aren't taken advantage of and abused. They talk about working with regional, state, and federal partners to ensure Philadelphia police is using the best strategies, and when they're not, that they'll bring in additional police officers from outside the police district. They're talking about putting more cops on the street by revamping how the police department is. These are the exact... I'm actually reading in highlight off of Helen Gim's safety plan. In case you were wondering, in case you thought I was just talking about Rebecca Reihart, this is Helen Gim's safety plan. So for all you folks out there that keep saying that I'm crazy and that Helen Gim is the only one talking about taking police off the street or revamping the police department or defunding the police department, that's not what she's saying. And that's also not what Rebecca Reihart is saying. Rebecca Reihart and Helen Gim have the exact same public statement on their campaign sites about what needs to be done with the police department. The police department needs to be reformed, yes. It needs to have funding reduced, yes. But there's only one way in the city of Philadelphia that's going to happen, and that's if you can get it past the FOP. The FOP contract comes up for renegotiation every year. And if the mayor's office can't find a contract that works for the head of the FOP, McNesby, then it goes to arbitration with the state. And the state arbiter isn't really equal. The state arbiter most usually finds more points in favor of the FOP than they do in favor of the city of Philadelphia. And we get stuck with a budget increase, and we get stuck with having to give more money to the FOP. So the only way any of this is going to change is if you take expenditures out of the police department's hands in minutia. There's just no other way to do it. The FOP isn't going to agree to a reduction in staffing. They're not going to agree to a reduction in payroll. They're not going to agree to a retraining around community policing unless that retraining around community policing gets them more money in the long run and gets their police officers more hours and more overtime. That's the only way they're going to agree to it, and they're not going to agree to it if it's an actual investment in time for their police officers, because they're there to protect the time and energy of their police officers. For better or for worse, that's what they're doing. And their police officers that exist are who they are. They're not going to change. And the only way to get these changes done is by the roughly laid out plan of Helen Gim or Rebecca Reihart. Both of them have the same friggin' plan. It's the exact same thing, people. So, I don't know. One area where I've recently seen a difference, and I don't think that difference will last into very far into the general election campaign, is school privatization. Let's talk school privatization. Charter schools. That's what we're talking about. Charter schools are where you take your child, instead of sending them to a publicly funded school, you send them to a school that is a nonprofit or a for-profit entity run as a business, essentially. And you take a tax credit to send your child to that school. That tax credit may or may not be equal to the child's tuition, but that tax credit allows you to take the money that you would normally be spending on public school and spend it on your basically private education of your child. Okay, great. Understandable framework. You want a particular education for your child. Say your child is on the autism spectrum, or your child is deaf, or any number of other things. Your child is just really great at music. Your child is a prodigy, and can actually compose a concerto. You want to take advantage of this early adept thing for your child, so you want to send them to a charter school. Wonderful, great for you. Unfortunately, any charter school tuition comes directly out of the budget of the local public school tuition. So you're in theory, one for one, taking your child out of public school and putting it in private school. you're in theory reducing the strain on the local public school, but as a general rule, the more students that come out of a public school district, the less money they have, but the building's the same size. Anybody who runs a business can tell you the overhead costs of having a brick and mortar business are the same, regardless of how many people you service. So you can only plan decades out how many children you think you're going to service. And the Philadelphia school system was planned in the 40s and 50s and it existed through the 80s in basically the same plan. The expected growth rate of Philadelphia with the expected number of children in Philadelphia as a percentage. The expected growth rate happened. What didn't happen is the expected growth rate in tax receipts and funding for schools. The Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, we have a law that all schools are supposed to be equally funded. Um, but Harrisburg is run by Republicans, and Philadelphia is a Democrat city, and they don't like us very much. So we don't always get all the funding that we're supposed to. And one of the areas where they've been able and successful in cutting funding without really generating a lot of ire in the voting public is in school funding. Um, because most of Pennsylvania doesn't care if Philadelphia's schools are properly funded. There is a court case. Only one of the candidates actually participated in that court case. That was Helen Gim. And to her credit, she's been on the forefront of this funding for schools issue since before really even being political. She was a teacher. She was a reporter. She learned to learned about the problems with school funding, much as any of us does by having kids and by being a teacher in the system. Um, it's a problem. It's a funding problem, and Helen Gim, participated in that process of suing the state of Pennsylvania. The lawsuit was won. It was found that the state does underfund Philadelphia public schools, and so there will be additional funding coming to Philadelphia public schools. But the disinvestment from public schools across Pennsylvania has been, and across the country really, has already had its impact. We have schools that have basic structural problems like having lead and asbestos in the school, like just having not had enough maintenance. Um, in reality, the disinvestment, means that you need to invest more. It's like anything else. If you have a house and you don't invest in its upkeep for decades, you're gonna need to invest more to bring it up to current than somebody similarly funded who has a house that has been taken care of. Um, these buildings haven't been taken care of. I mean, they've been taken care of to the best that they can, and this is no ding on those folks who work with not adequate funding for decades to try and educate our children. This is just a ding on the fact that you can't. If you can't afford a broom, you can't sweep. If you can't afford new tiles, you can clean them so often, but eventually they break. If you can't afford things, if you can't afford the maintenance costs more in the long run. you know, Rebecca Reihart's campaign and Rebecca Reihart as a candidate has never been very familiar with education or education funding, other than to look into the funding as comptroller and note that it wasn't high enough. Um, and um, she's also, never been able to form a policy on education or education funding until recently, and her campaign came out with a policy in education funding that doesn't seem to match up with the realities that we see in Philadelphia, and echoes verbiage from problematic folks like Jeffrey Yes. Jeffrey Yes, if you don't know, is the richest person in the state of Pennsylvania, the richest person in Philadelphia, and visibly attempts to influence elections and local politics through a campaign uh, of providing donations to certain elections um, and certain candidates. Obviously, Jeffrey Yes, we live in Philadelphia. Jeffrey Yes cannot donate to the Republican candidate in Philadelphia and get what he wants done. Well, he can, and he does, but he also donates to Democratic candidates and has his PACs donate to Democratic candidates. And so rather than running as a politician himself, he uses his money to essentially buy politicians and also provide them with, easy to digest um, little pieces. Uh, Little pieces. Sorry, I'm reading notes from Timothy. I'll just bring you on real quick. Tim, introduce yourself, your pronouns, what it is you do. Oh, you're on mute. Let me fix it.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Timothy Reimer, he, him. I'm a committee person in 4610. I'm involved with some local environmental stuff and various community outreach projects in my neighborhood. And, politics are just one of my hobbies. For work, I run a construction firm.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And For those that have watched the show before, you've been on several times, and you have interesting ability to collect data about local Philadelphia politics and often catch on to things before other folks do. Um, I was just talking about the similarities between all the frontrunners' campaigns, um, and I'm getting a little sick of having people tell me online that these candidates are actually very different from each other. um, but yeah, was talking about school privatization and Rebecca Reihart's recent basically quoting of Jeffrey Yass points on privatization of schools. Um,
Well, there's definitely going to be some differences when it comes to how candidates fall on charter schools. And I mean, the big difference is, everyone else is going to be okay with charter schools with the exception of Helen Gim. That's really the big difference there. Um, I mean, that's sort of a tough one. On a personal level, like I appreciate that charter schools, give economically disadvantaged parents choices in the education of their children because that's traditionally not something they were given. It was, you can go to the school in your neighborhood, or if your kid is really smart, they can go to one of the criteria selection-based schools, but that's it. And, it's something like a third of the students in the district go to charter schools. So clearly there is a large demand for, choice on where kids go. So part of me, wants to respect, parents' ability to have an option to send their children to where they believe they can get the best education. But the flip side of that is there's not nearly as much oversight of the charter schools, and with a few exceptions, they're performing not much better than the district itself. It seems,
Yeah.
we're duplicating lots of effort on the top, and the children on the bottom are seeing no or very minimal gains from it.
Well, I mean, yeah, with as a an overall, I would say charter schools are a complete failure if you take them in amalgamation. If you look at some specific charter schools, yes, they perform better than the public schools that they're nearby. But as an amalgamation, charter schools do not provide a better education than public school. They have a higher failure rate. They have a higher expulsion rate. They have a higher rate of violence. They have a higher rate of almost everything that is negative, and a lower rate of getting students onto secondary education as well. Um, that being said, yeah, it seems like something that parents should have a choice. Um, like I was saying, the in introducing this topic, if you have a kid that has special needs around their education or is very good at something or another, you want to highlight that. You want to take advantage of that this time in their life. As a parent myself, I want to give her every opportunity to succeed in what she's doing. Um, and I don't know how better to do that than choosing a school. The flip side of the coin too is that charter schools have the ability to not accept certain students, even though the Philadelphia charter requires charter schools to have a random lottery. It's recently been shown that not all charter schools have that random lottery, or they exclude children from the lottery based on even things like what zip code they're coming from, or things that really are just basically racist. Um, it's problematic that those schools are doing that, and I don't know how that gets solved either. Uh,
Well, I mean, the first step would be having a reasonable amount of oversight for the charter schools. I don't have the exact number, but it's comically low. There's a couple dozen employees at the school district who are in charge of overseeing all of the charter schools, versus the however many hundreds or thousands of employees at the district level that oversee the rest of the schools. And so, I mean, that's how stuff like that happens. And it only comes to light when, someone on the news catches it, or someone is just disgusted with it and comes forward. In the case you're talking about, I believe it was Franklin Town Charter. That was a whistleblower, came forward and didn't approve of what was happening. Someone, I believe, who actually worked for the school.
yes. You're exactly correct on how it came forward, and I wonder. I mean, even with oversight, how do you ensure that the people who are running these schools are on the same page as the rest of us? How do you ensure that they're not just as one report on charter schools put it, often charter schools are just a fancy way of laundering money, and that's relatively accurate. I mean, it's the number of corruption examples and lawsuits against charter schools that have happened because of financial issues is staggering. Um, so I don't know.
I think another part of the charter school agenda that doesn't necessarily get talked about, and it's reflected in the fact that you see ultra wealthy conservative people supporting this charter school agenda, is that by controlling schools, they'll have a say in how children are taught and be able to influence people's thinking, in a very important developmental stage. And I think that's, I mean, it sounds a little bit much, but I think that's really part of the conservative agenda with charter schools, is to start indoctrinating children into a more conservative mindset at a younger age. And,
Well,
that's something we need to be aware of.
I don't. While I agree, it seems like it's a bit much, but also that's actually like the public talking point for the conservative agenda behind taking over school boards is to indoctrinate children into a conservative mindset in their youth, to present them with a version of history that doesn't match reality, that is patriotic, quote unquote, that is what they want children to hear. I mean, the I find it fascinating that like the things that that folks say as a as an indictment of the charter school system or as an indictment of privatization of schools, when we say it, when people that are anti charter schools say it, people are like, "Oh no, that's not real. That can't possibly be what's happening." But when a charter school proponent says it, it's just it's part of the deal. I don't know, that always makes me makes me laugh a little bit. Um,
I mean, I think I think how we get to a solution on the charter school problem is by improving our public schools. And I briefly caught a little bit of the previous thing when I was going back and forth with my other meeting. Um, but how we deal with this problem is we make our public schools good again. We make it so people want to send their children to them. And I mean, none of the candidates that I've seen, has articulated like a real plan on how we actually do that. I mean, Helen Gim has come the closest, but when you make unrealistic promises, with no way on how to fund them, it just becomes hard to fathom. I'm sorry, I actually have to jump back to my
yeah, no
other meeting.
problem. Go ahead.
I'll be back in like hopefully like 5-10 minutes.
No worries. Um, yeah, I mean, and that therein you have the general problem that I have personally with the candidates that are out there. Um, how I personally am making my election decisions is by not only by who is promising what in this election, but who can actually get those things done. I think that the history of all these folks, and what they've done in their respective positions is oftentimes a little bit more important than the campaign promises that they're making. Because at the end of the day, the position of mayor in the city of Philadelphia isn't powerless, but it becomes easily depowered when you have other elements in the local government who don't like what it is you're doing. When you have enough people in the local government who dislike your motivations or dislike your goals, you become a lame duck mayor very quickly in Philadelphia, and I'm sure Jim Kenney can attest to that. Um, he got into office on the power of being one of us, being a local guy, being, popular, being able to form coalitions, being able to work with people in city government. And then once he was in office, the city government he knew and had worked with for years completely changed. We voted in progressive candidates. We as a city voted in candidates that had different goals than the era in which Jim Kenney was on city council. We voted in candidates that wanted completely different things than what the South Philly contingent of Mayor Kenny's primary support wanted. And it, for better or for worse, it is what it is. We voted for people who had progressive ideas. Um, that didn't work for some of the folks, that supported Kenny, but also it doesn't work for Kenny if that's not what he believes in. And also, it makes it so that Kenny can't get things done because he can't get somebody to create the laws that he would like to sign into law. He can't. If you're an executive, you're here to enforce laws and enact laws, and do things that the law says you're supposed to be doing. You're the action arm of the government, and the mayorship can only do so much to influence what the government is being asked to do. Unfortunately, Mayor Kenny, didn't want to do the things that he was being asked to do, and so it became a mayorship that didn't really uh, service the goals of the city government. Um, where am I going with this? It's rather open knowledge. It's rather public knowledge that um, Helen has had trouble forming coalitions in the city of Philadelphia, forming coalitions on council, making waves. She's often been called by myself and others as an elbows out type of person, an activist for sure. And like I've said before, that's a perfectly valid way to be. You can always there's a lot of people that get things done by being the loudest voice and the most troublemaking voice in the room. I'm one of them. I've often gotten things done by being the one in the room who says and does things that nobody else will say and do. I was just having a conversation with a friend yesterday that yeah, I'm kind of on the forefront of talking points and pissing people off. So when I want to do things, I have to think about things that could come back and bite me in the rear end later on. I have a sailboat and I want to offer um, sailing tours to disadvantaged youth, to generate an interest and a representation for them of careers on the waterfront here in Philadelphia. We live on the middle of, in between two very active navigable rivers, and a large portion of our remaining industry and economy here in Philadelphia is based on those waterfronts. Um, Yet the participation by people of color in Philadelphia's waterfront industries is very low. It's not representative of the city itself. How do you improve that? Well, you improve that by giving children the opportunity to experience the waterfront. If you've never looked at a boat and gone, hey, I could be the captain of that boat one day, you never think about it and you never pursue it. So one of my goals with my sailboat is to eventually offer the ability for children to come on board, tour the waterfront of Philadelphia, see all these things in action, and if they like it, they might develop a passion for sailing, a passion for working on the water. As we've said before on the show, a large portion of the wealth in the black community and the wealth of Philadelphia was developed because we're on these two rivers. I'd say actually the grand majority of it has been developed through use of the waterways, and getting children who live here interested in those careers is a very important thing, at least to me. But I want to do that, and I'm not independently wealthy. How do you do that when you're not independently wealthy? Well, you seek other people to fund it. How do you seek other people to fund it? You take donations. You ask for people's money. And so, what are the consequences when you start asking people for money? Well, when you start asking for people for money and you start getting money, people get jealous and people try and find a way to get you in trouble for getting that money. It's happened many, many times, um, and not to me, but to plenty of other people. So when you're looking to do things, and they even if they are 100% on the legal side of doing things, you have to be careful. And if you're an elbows out person like me, like Helen Gim, uh, y- sometimes you're just doing things by yourself, without any support from anybody else, and you're forcing your way into them happening. Well, when you force your way into things happening, sometimes that means that you have to be careful about what you're trying to force into existence. Um, it's just a reality. It's just a fact of life. It's just something that happens. Um, and if if you're like me, if you're like Helen Gim, you can get a lot of things done, but you have to be careful. You can't have a life like that and expect that in the future you're going to get the participation of everybody around you to get things done. And I don't think that the office of mayor of Philadelphia can get things done without the participation of everybody else on city council, in the Philadelphia Police District, in everywhere else. I think that that all the other parts of government are very important. Um, all of that, to say, I think that this Democratic primary is very important. I hope you vote in it. I hope that you um, very carefully consider who it is you're voting for. I think that this is more important than a normal cult of personality type election. I think it's important that you consider why you're voting for somebody, but also whether or not they can achieve the goals they set out for themselves in their public statements. Um, this primary is happening on Tuesday. It's going to identify the Republican and Democratic candidates for every office in Philadelphia, mayor, all the elections for city council that are contested. It's going to decide the candidates for a lot of things, comptroller. So you as you look at these candidates, even if you don't know much about them, I think in city government, it's more important that you learn more about who they have been, what they have been doing, what they've been successful at, and how they've been successful or unsuccessful, than learning about what their plans are, because it seems like even the Republican plans for city government match up with each other this election cycle. So I don't know. It's your call. Vote for who you want. I think that it's important, and I think that the candidates still have a lot to say, and there is a lot of time before the general election. The general election is not till November, second Monday of November, I believe, if I may be correct, but second week of November. We'll have the general election that'll decide who actually is taking office in January of next year. And uh, you know, uh, participate in government as much as you can. I want to talk while Tim's still busy on the art commission. I want to talk a little bit about corruption. Um, you may have heard of U.S. Rep. George Santos. George Santos is the representative in the House of Representatives, federal representative for New York's third district, I believe it is, um, a district that is part of Long Island and Brooklyn, and uh, an interesting character to say the least. He was actually just arrested yesterday on federal charges, federal criminal charges, including making false statements on the floor of Congress, wire fraud. Um, let's see what else. I wanna see what some of these charges are. Um, a ton of stuff. But if you look into the history of George Santos, which isn't his name, which is a name he legally changed his name to, I think you'll find that it's pretty common sense that he was charged with these things. Um, I would assume that since he's been arrested on federal charges, he'll also soon face a request to resign from the House. Um, but who knows? The knowledge of who George Santos is and the crimes he's committed has been public since before the election, and it's fascinating how he became an elected official, and also fascinating that the Republican Party hasn't asked for his resignation in the past. In other arrest news and conviction news, Enrique Terrio and three other Proud Boys were convicted last week on seditious conspiracy having to do with January 6th. One of the Proud Boys convicted for organizing and being an organizer of January 6th is a Philadelphia native and local, and with family, second generation family, two generations of family that have served on the Philadelphia Police Department. Um, some other high profile charges and things that have happened over the weekend. In Tennessee, one of the leaders against the Tennessee Three, one of the other House representatives, was actually removed from his office, and his name was removed from the Tennessee legislature. Fascinating what happens in a short time period.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you for actually being as committed to politics as you are. I really I for one appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know I missed most of the meeting. I'm sorry about that. It's just this golf course thing. I really had to get my 2 cents in, and they really like just drug this meeting out much longer than it needed to be.
no worries. We've all been there. Um, it is 11 o'clock, but I'm parked in a good spot, so I can hang on for a couple extra minutes if you have any thoughts on anything else. Like I was saying, the election is the primary is Tuesday. So this is the last coffee break chat we'll have before the primary. Any thoughts on the candidates that are up for primary, either Democratic or Republican? Where you think they stand now? I know your prediction a couple of weeks ago was Parker. Are you sticking with that prediction?
I still think Parker is going to win. She's currently up to 40 out of 66 wards endorsing her, which is going to translate into major on the ground support. And unless there are people handing out sample ballots at other places, those ward leaders pick the candidates that go on the sample ballots, and that's going to be what most voters are handed before they walk in. Um, looking at some of the polling that was done prior, it all left Parker either in first or second place, depending on which one you asked. And I think the polling, especially the one that was done electronically via text message and stuff, was a lot less likely to catch Parker's base of older folks. So we're going to see a demographic that turns out in large numbers in elections. We're going to see what I think will be a larger than predicted amount of support for Parker.
Polling by James Sanders, or not James Sanders, I'm sorry. I'm getting my folks mixed up. Polling done about undecideds, specifically in the black community, noted that, and I talked about this at the beginning, over 60% of the black community is still undecided as of 2 weeks ago. And I find that fascinating. And also, to your point, Parker has the most support amongst the black community of any of the candidates. I think not without reason. I think that Helen Gim's campaign and Rebecca Reihart's campaign have both had problematic interactions with the black community. And I'm sure I'm going to get dinged for saying that from uh, some of my audience and or folks that I know. But I mean, literally, there was I know I've been harping on it publicly and personally that Helen Gim's campaign and Helen Gim's office when she was a city council rep would not talk to me ever. But I thought I was isolated in that. And there was recently, that was recently brought up um, that by the president of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists that this is a problem that Helen Gim has always had and continues to have, and that her campaign and her campaign officials seem to be doing unethical things with regard to black journalists. Um,
Well, there have been several instances of black journalists, complaining about the treatment they've received. Ernest Owens, has been rather vocal.
Ernest
Um,
is the president of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists, by the way, for those wondering.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there have been other examples, but I mean, it's he just, he has his way of going about doing things.
Well, I
And
mean, like
I've actually,
that's his shtick. We all have our
yeah,
shtick. We all have our thing. That's Ernest Owens. Like it or hate it, his thing is to report on things happening to him. Um,
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not always the biggest fan of his reporting, but I've appreciated the insight that he's brought to the election. He obviously is a supporter of progressive causes, but he's not, giving his support to the progressive candidate unless he sees what he likes, and he doesn't. And I respect that. That shows a lot of character and integrity on his part.
yeah.
So going back to the black vote. So, I mean, first, we got to be clear, the black vote is not a monolith. Older black voters, are going to skew one way, and younger black voters are going to skew the other way. And then
Well,
there are
let's
distinct
be clear.
geographical differences.
Let's be clear about that skew. Older black voters are going to skew law and order. Younger black voters are going to skew progressive.
Yes, I think that is correct.
Yeah.
And and then middle-aged folks, people in between, it could go either way. but it's also important to acknowledge that there are different voting blocks of Black folks in our city. There's the political machine controlled by Senator Williams over here in West Philly. There's the Northeast Coalition, and there's various other groups. Those are the two major ones. I should have gotten my notes out so I could have gotten a little more specific. But it's still I haven't seen any of the other candidates making active efforts to really reach out to the Black community. I mean, with the exception of Jeff Brown, and he's been getting hammered left and right, for all of his missteps, especially the campaign finance stuff. And I think that's eroded a lot of confidence that people may have had in him.
Coming from a person of color, me, I gotta say, Jeff Brown couldn't have run a poorer campaign if you're trying to win the black vote. Um, it, he may be anti-racist in his heart. Like he may have the black community's interests in mind when he's making decisions, but I gotta say, I've known a billion Jeff Browns in my life, and they're not the kind of person that you want running things. They're great guys, and if you can get a paycheck from them, or you can get them to help you with a project, that's wonderful. But you don't want them running things. Um,
No, I completely agree. I mean, I don't want millionaires running things, period. So that cuts him out. But I mean, he has, I don't know Jeff Brown personally, but I have a lot of friends who do know Jeff personally. And, my understanding is that he genuinely cares about people. I mean, he's definitely stretching with the image he's projecting, but I think he's just bit off more than more than he can chew. And running some supermarkets is not a qualification for being mayor, unfortunately.
right, right. Oh,
It's
I
no,
don't
I
know.
mean the
Is being a teacher and then activist a qualification for being mayor?
well, I mean, to Helen Gim's credit, she's more than just a teacher and an activist. She's a two-term city council member, and she also is the founder of a charter school, lest people forget.
I don't
But
think that'll ever be forgotten.
no, hopefully not. Given her anti-charter stance. Um, but she's more than just an activist and a teacher. And honestly, calling her a teacher is a bit of a stretch. She was a teacher for exactly 1 year. You know,
That
I
still
worked at a public
requires a lot of educational commitment. That requires a lot of seat time, you know.
No, it does. I mean, it's just, like I worked at a pizzeria in high school. I put a lot of effort into that, but I'm no chef.
What I'm saying is to get credentialed as a teacher, no matter how, it's the same thing as a school building. No matter how many students you have, no matter how many years you have as a teacher, it takes a lot of overhead to get to that spot.
No, I mean, I agree with that, but it's, you know, I think a lot of the respect as a society that we should have for teachers is based on the years and years of effort that they put into teaching our children, trying to make a better future for our society, and without the benefit of great pay. Like that's why teachers are held in such high esteem, I think. And yeah, you went to college to be a teacher, you were a teacher for 1 year, but you didn't put in the time, you didn't get the experience, of decades of that work. Like
Or even
that's what
multiple years of that work, which
yeah.
I know a lot of teachers, and the common thing that they always say is that you go in with one set of expectations, and then the even a few years in, you realize where reality meets expectation. But I,
There's a lot of experience that you get on the job that just no matter what you learn in school, it's just not going to make up for the real world. So let's see. We've got poor Almond Brown.
Statistically not running, actually,
Yeah,
but
at this point, a rounding error, as his campaign finance reports have made painfully clear. They
um,
the amount of money he raised is like what some of the other candidates bring in a day for his entire campaign.
I mean, which I think all of us would probably appreciate if like campaign finance was reformed such that candidates could only bring in that amount of money. um, I'm sick of mailers and flyers and everything else. I think if folks wanna if folks wanna to tout a candidate, they should just have to speak to you in person at this point.
I
Um,
don't know. I've gotten too many knocks on my door, and
well, you live in West Philly. I don't know who they think my block is going to vote for, but I think we've only had two canvassers by.
they I mean it's hell and Gim territory out here.
Yeah.
But the Ryanhart people, they're hopeful. They've been sending people knocking on doors all over the place in my neighborhood, and they're going to pick up some votes that way. I mean, it'll be interesting. Election day itself. I'm actually doing this thing. The people who run our elections, the poll workers. There's like five of them for each division,
Hmm.
each place where people go to vote. These people work 14-hour days from the city for something like 10 or 11 bucks an hour, not even a living wage. And the city does not take care of them. No food, nothing. So, for the poll workers at my division and the other two divisions in the building where I vote, my fiance and I will be providing them with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We've done this for the past several years. So if any of your listeners out there, are thinking they want to do something nice, keep in mind that those people who are making it possible for you to vote are there all day. They could probably use a snack, and I'm sure they'd appreciate it if you brought them something.
Yep. Yep. Although, where was it? Georgia um, made it illegal to provide anything other than water to anyone in line or in the polling place.
Well, luckily we have no such regulations here in Philadelphia. I would encourage people to be respectful of the poll workers' time. If there's a line, please don't distract them. Let them, focus on the voters. But I assure you that they will appreciate that people are thinking about them, and that you will not get in trouble for bringing them refreshments. I'm last year I brought a home cooked dinner for 15 people. No complaints.
Awesome.
Which yeah, we'll be doing the same thing this year. We're deep frying a couple turkeys and making some mac and cheese, throwing together some salads and some vegetables this time, trying to be a little healthier for these folks, especially older people. I don't want to kill them with all the cholesterol.
So, on campaign finance, what are your thoughts about Yas and Vague and other folks and their rather large donations to through PACs and whatnot to this to various candidates?
Well, I don't like a lot of money in politics. I think people are perhaps a little bit hung up on this Jeffrey Yoss guy. I mean, he spends a lot of money, but a certain segment of people are kind of obsessed with the guy, maybe at the expense of catching on to other things that are going on, or objectively looking at the finances of the people they support.
I mean, he does. He is the most likely to spend the most money on an election or any other political thing in the city, including the golf course. So I don't know if that obsession is not warranted.
I mean, I'm not saying to ignore the guy. I'm just saying there seems to be, like a hyper focus on this guy, at the expense of maybe looking at, the $2 million and change that Helen Gim brought in, and how it, what's going on with that money. I mean, Ernest Owens, he did some interesting reporting on the connection to with the pharmaceutical industry after Gim's campaign made it a point to say they don't take money from the pharmaceutical industry.
But they actually
Uh,
do.
oh yeah, no, I went and looked through. They've taken money from, at least a half dozen local pharmaceutical companies, or all the executives from a half dozen local pharmaceutical companies. And in some cases, the timing was even worse than what Ernest brought up in his campaign. I should have had the details ready for all of it, but I was sort of focused on the golf course meeting today, getting prepped for that.
No worries.
But it's basically the is it the wife of of the Paratech Pharmaceutical CEO started giving large donations to Helen Gim, like it's like a week or 10 days after she voted against the bill requiring the reporting on drug sales reps, and then continued to do so without having given her any money beforehand. I think it added up to something like 30 grand uh, over the course, but I'd have to double check. I don't have the numbers right in front of me.
Yeah, I
Um, you know,
mean, I never have the numbers right in front of me either, so the rough numbers are enough. And I think folks, if they're interested, should be able to find that information. I mean, like you said, Ernest Owens reported on it. The information is actually public, and it takes a little bit of digging, but I think it's important that folks be interested, but also look into this information themselves, because I don't know if you heard my rant at the beginning here, but I was talking about how everybody is saying, like, of the front runner candidates in the Democratic primary, Gim and Reinhardt are supposed to be the two front runners according to polling and according to like general consensus of like social media, but they're they're quote unquote so different according to everybody else. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're like, if you read their campaign websites, they're exactly the same candidate. They're both saying exactly the same things, other than education. Education, I think, is the one area where they've said anything different from each other. And if you're a one issue voter, sure, cast your vote that way. For whose education program you believe will be best. But I think it's important that even if you're a one issue voter, that you actually read what these people have to say and actually find out where they got their money from. Don't take my word for it or your word for it, or even like the numbers that we collect and publish, or Ernest Owens' word for it. Look into it your damn self and figure out like how much this means to you. How important is it to you? And yeah, that leaves a lot of people who are like, I'm not political. Well, you are. You do anything in the city of Philadelphia and you're political, even just breathing. Um,
so there's like a great tool that people can use to without a lot of technical experience, to look at the candidate's campaign financing. There's a group called Philly Power Research, and if you Google them, you can find them. I mean, they definitely have their own agenda with what they're pushing, but they have a campaign finance explorer that they keep pretty regularly updated, and it shows like the connections of like what industry candidates are getting money from and stuff. And it's a great starting point for people. If they really want to take a look at it, I would suggest start there, and then maybe after that, if it's something that they want to spend some more time in, they can look at the actual reports. It's the first couple of times anyone does it, it's going to be discouraging because you won't recognize the names, but the more you look at these reports, the more common the names become, and you can start, seeing the connections between people, and if you're going to really try to understand one of these reports, even a 5-page report, you should probably, and that's like as small as they're going to be, you should probably give yourself like a good 20, 30 minutes to just go over it, the first time and, search all the people's names, if it's a big donation, and just get a feel for it. And then moving forward after that, it will take less time each time, but it still requires some effort. And I can definitely understand why it's intimidating for people to try. The first time you look at it, it's just like staring at a foreign language almost.
Yeah. Well, I mean, their campaign finance data explorer is pretty self-explanatory. Um, and I've just sent the link to Megan. I don't know if she'll post it, but if she does post it, I'll put it up here on the screen. But it directly shows, a graph of contributions to each candidate, what sector those contributions came from, and comparing them all to each other, which is pretty fascinating. And also, the shows Alan Dom having received a huge amount of his campaign funding from real estate, which is accurate.
So that's Alan Dom's self funding. If you look at Dom
Right.
and and Jeff Brown, they both are super skewed because their self donations are counted in their own industries. Um, I think the
Well,
last time I looked at
I think that's important too. I think it's an important metric to count their self funding in their own industries as well, though, because Alan Dom is a landlord. He is in real estate. Like that's you know
Oh, no, I mean, no, I mean, I agree. It's important to acknowledge where that money came from. The reason I say I think it's important to also acknowledge that it's self-funded is that otherwise it gives the appearance that he has support from many, many more people than he actually does. Like that's why it's
oh,
important
I
to
see.
acknowledge the self-funding because you would look at that at Alan Dom and think, wow, this guy's got, $10 million. These real estate people must really love him, but the truth is like, all most of that money is his own. And I mean, there is something to be said for putting your own money into it. He is the least likely to be beholden to someone else.
It's true.
Um, but again, I just don't like the idea of millionaires being in charge.
Well, it gives you an outsized megaphone. Also, Helen Gim is in that millionaires club. You know, by marriage, not necessarily by her own money, but
Well, I mean, no, that's, when you're married, you have joint assets and, I mean, that's how I'm not even married yet, but that's how I view my finances with my fiance is that, what's mine is hers and vice versa. So I don't think it's important to acknowledge, Helen Gim is separate and distinct from her husband, with their each own opinions and jobs and whatnot, but they're definitely connected. And I guess it hadn't occurred to me, but anyone who's a city council member for 6 years, that's a pretty high paying job. It's something like an eighth of $1 million a year. Your taxes and whatnot, it adds up. But if you've got a well-to-do husband, or partner, then yes, you're going to become wealthy very quickly.
so the theme for today's show, at least what I've been talking about, and also the title, "Power of Visibility Can Never Be Underestimated," and the general theme that I've been talking about is uh, the ability of any of these candidates to actually do any of their campaign promises as mayor. Because if you look at the candidates, yes, they have differences, but in the grand majority, even the Republican candidates, even David O, when he spoke on this show last week, they all have very similar goals. They all have very similar campaign promises. Some of them might try and get at it a different way, but or say it a different way so that they can keep the folks that are like one issue voters on their side. But even talking to David O's like, yeah, the police department needs to be reformed. We can't have a police department that doesn't do its job. It's got to get out there and it's got to do its job. Like you're talking to the de facto Republican candidate for mayor, and he's saying the same thing that Rebecca Reihart and Helen Gim and even Sherelle Parker is saying, that there needs to be police reform. That it needs to be based around community policing, quote unquote, which for progressives isn't a term that they like to say because it's a dumbass thing to say in the first place. But anyway, um, with all these candidates saying the same thing, how do they get that done? How do they get police reform done? And I think it's important to look at each of the candidates and if they could get what they're promising done.
Well, I mean, when people have made some wild promises. Ryan I forget which one of the debates, but she said she was going to solve our problem with Kensington. The drug epidemic down there, and
Yeah, that's not a one mayoral term. That's not even like a five mayoral term solution. Like it took generations to build that problem, and it's going to take more generations to solve that problem.
yeah, I mean that's it, it's not a quick fix. The only thing you could do in the short term is move it somewhere else, and even that the ability to do that is kind of doubtful. Yeah, I mean that was a wildly unrealistic one. Um, Hellingen proposing an extra $10 billion a year. I mean, extra $10 billion investment in the school district, or $2.5 billion more a year. Um, I wish we had that money. I just, that's like half the city budget, maybe a little, slightly less than half the city budget. That's a completely unrealistic promise. I mean, if it's going to happen, it's not happening because of her. Like that money would come from the state government or the federal government. And, she's not the one who would deliver that promise. That would be our Congress people or our state representatives, or maybe the governor, so that's a completely unrealistic promise. And the mayor has limited control over the schools.
That was my point. Is the mayor's office has limited control over everything. Like being mayor doesn't make you king of Philadelphia. It's not like you can make a campaign promise and then necessarily get it done.
Well, I mean, you can make promises like, say, like, if a candidate was gonna, promise that Parks and Rec wasn't gonna, destroy the environment, on a regular basis, that would be within the mayor's power to implement by appointing a commissioner, who is interested in preserving the environment. Like
Right.
that's like there are promises that they can do. You know, I think Parker's going to win, but Parker is saying that like she's going to hire all these extra cops. I mean, that's if you like cops, that's great. But we don't even have enough cops now. Like cops are quitting. Where are you going to find
Yeah.
these non
How are
these
you gonna?
cops? Like,
You're not going to hire them because you're not responsible for hiring them. The FOP and the police department itself is responsible for hiring them, and they can't hire them now because they don't offer a compensation package that matches with the surrounding area, and also they can't afford more cops. So how like then you have to look at somebody who's offering to restructure the department, like Reihart or Gim, and look at how they're planning on restructuring it.
and I don't think they have the legal authority to restructure the police department in the ways they want to. I mean, maybe I could be wrong, but I don't.
Reinhardt's plan to restructure the department is she proposed it when she was comptroller, and it had the mayor's office has the legal authority to implement it. But the question becomes, what does the FOP do when contract negotiation comes up, and how do they fight back against it? Because both Gim and Reinhardt's plan would take power and money out of the FOP, and the FOP is not going to like that.
No, and the FOP, is in fact a union that has a lot of rights, and
More rights
that
than most unions.
yeah, and that's that's what I mean in that they don't like that they don't necessarily have the legal authority to implement those changes. I mean, you would those changes that's like in order to make those kind of changes, you're going to need, the support of city council and drafting new laws, and maybe our state and federal representatives, in dealing with some of the actual labor issues that are going to be brought up. Because I mean, I'm not a fan of the FOP, but they are a union and it is their job to look out for their members, so they're going to fight as hard as they can to do that. I don't like it, but they're a super
Well,
powerful force, and it's
personally, I think McNesby fights harder to keep a hoagie in his mouth, but than he does for his
yeah.
members. But that we could talk. I think it would be interesting to talk unions in a in a future episode. But about the type of union the FOP is versus what unions are in general. But yeah. The FOP de facto runs the Philadelphia Police Department, and I said earlier, the FOP is essentially a second government to the city of Philadelphia, because it the things that the leadership of the FOP asks its members to do, can at times and has and does right now countermand things that, like, the police commissioner asks the police officers to do, or that the mayor's office asks the police officers to do.
Yeah, I mean, we could do an entire year's worth of conversation on police reform.
Yeah.
um
Um,
maybe the solution is get rid of the FOP and start from scratch.
well, I think
I mean,
that is a solution, and from Rebecca Reihart's documented way of restructuring the police, that she worked very hard on as comptroller, and from Gim's stance on how to restructure the police, I think that both of them are in a relatively innocuous way trying to depower the FOP.
well, I mean, I have no problem with that. If either of them wins and succeeds, in doing so, good on them. I will say, the one most likely to succeed in that would obviously be Reinhardt. Gim just doesn't really have the experience to push that through. I mean, maybe, we get lucky and she, hire someone really competent to help her.
Yeah, she's not a
Uh,
lawyer. Let's make a couple of things clear. She's not a lawyer, and she's never worked in the executive side of city government. She's worked in the council side of city government. So
yeah,
how to get things done in city hall, working with and in concert with the rest of city government, is not her area of expertise.
yeah. I mean, maybe we'll all be pleasantly surprised, and maybe she'll be really, really good at it. What I've heard from other people does not lead me to believe that, but we'll if she wins, we'll find. I mean, if she wins, I wish her well. I would like to see the things she talks about happen. I just don't think they will.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
that's the overall theme of today. Is, I think that it's really important for folks that are going to vote to really consider, you know, okay, I want this set of things done. Can this candidate actually get them done?
yeah, and that's with that metric, I think Reinhardt and Parker are the candidates with the most relevant experience and track records of actually getting things done.
I agree.
Um,
I think that Parker actually has a better chance of implementing her entire platform, to be honest, because it's so similar to like the current, status quo that everybody would just be on board with it. But
yeah, yeah. So something I thought was interesting we didn't get to talk about real quick was the continual endorsements that people are getting. Al Dom getting Mayor Green's endorsement. And for a whole generation of voters just learned that there was a mayor called Green 4 decades ago. And it was like 2 or 3 days ago. Kenny's not endorsement of
yeah,
Sherelle Parker.
yeah.
Like it was like, yeah, I voted for Sherelle Parker, but that's not an endorsement. Like
I'm just
that
answering
that
your
is
question.
that that's the typical of what we've gotten under the Kenny administration.
Yeah,
And
that's
also, I
the
think,
the some people say version of announcing your support for a candidate
yeah, although truth be told, the general reaction is that was bad
for
that was
Parker.
bad for Parker because of how much everybody is just sick of Kenny.
Um, I was going to bring up the fact that it seems like most of the existing infrastructure is voting for or seeking to align with Parker. I was driving down the street and saw signs for shoot, what's his name? Represents the district by the waterfront. Uh,
Oh, I'm terrible with the state reps names.
no,
I
council member Mark
Oh,
Squillo.
Squilla.
Yeah, Squilla's campaign signs have Parker on the other half.
Yeah, that checks out. I mean, that's what I was. That ties back to what I was saying earlier with the ward stuff, where because for a large percentage of people, the last candidate they hear about, there's a good chance they're going to vote for him.
Right.
And that's really why I see Parker winning is that end of the mile being handed a piece of paper that says, vote for Parker. Um, we'll see though. Yeah, was it Parker? She picked up some of Jeff Brown's unions. I think that was last week. Was it
Yeah.
the trash workers
Yeah.
and somebody else joined in? I mean, it's Parker is the establishment candidate, and there's it's not exciting, but I think that's why she's going to win. I think the progressives are going to be really disappointed in the results. They always try to sneak somebody in, in a crowded field, and that's where they make their biggest successes. But I don't think they're going to get it this time.
Oh, it's interesting. One thing that everybody who pollsters have brought up is that like there is a split between Gim and Reinhardt in the progressive support, and if there was only one progressive candidate running, it would be more likely for that candidate to win. But you have Dom, the like business slash real estate candidate. You've got Brown, who's basically, I mean, at this point, I would call his campaign like just a vanity exercise. Um, and you've got Parker, who's like the political candidate, who has received more of her support from unions than any other source. Um, in fact, it's funny because her union support in her campaign contributions is 30% of her campaign total. And combining other and unknown is 27%, which is, independent contributions and usually small dollar contributions, where Rebecca Reihart and Helen Gim both have 38% of their campaigns contributions are from other and unknown, so small dollar contributions. Um, which I find interesting because Gim's campaign attacked Reichert's campaign for getting money from Yas, but they're both basically running independent small dollar campaigns. Um,
So, looking at the Philly Power Research Explorer,
hmm,
um, it's important to keep in mind that unlike the campaign finance reports, they don't actually break down the small donations. Now,
right. They don't break them
like
out.
you're right, small donations are not itemized. They don't say anything about the employer, but there are different categories. So, $0 to $50 donations from a single person or entity, you don't have to report it. 50 to $250, you do have to report it, but you don't have to report employment information. And then 250 up, you do have to, you have to report, where it came from and their employer. Of course, there are no teeth in the employment requirement thing because people will just lie and write not employed or self-employed, and there are no consequences for that. So a large percentage of that unknown is people like who just didn't list their employment information, and that's a big chunk of it. Like the actual percentages of small dollar donations, like non-itemized, less than 50, that Helen Gim's got the most,
Yes.
and it's like it's just a couple percentage points of her campaign, like maybe 3 or 4 at the absolute most, in actual small dollar donations. Like no one, despite any claims to the contrary, is raising significant percentages of their campaign financing from unitemized donors. And even like the next tier up, the 50 to $250, where you don't have to report that, even that is going to be a relatively small percentage, like maybe 10 or 15% of the total max. Like the overwhelming majority of everyone's money is coming from large donors. And if you look at the donations, it makes sense. That's just not something that the power research people aggregate out. Maybe they should. I've you know One day maybe I'll go to one of their events and suggest it. But it is important to just use that page as a starting point, because it doesn't like it doesn't provide as much detail as necessary to make direct statements like that.
Um, yeah, I'm just talking in the aggregate. With any data, there's always loss of information and like uncertainties. But like if you're collecting the same data on all the candidates, it's like I said, the other and unknown. Yeah, you're going to have a certain percentage of that that isn't actually other or actually unknown or actually belongs in a different category. However, it's clear like Sherelle Parker's support is primarily union. Um,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Helen Gim's support and Rebecca Reihart's support is primarily other and unknown. It's not, neither of them has a clear industry support from any particular industry that is larger than their undocumented support. Um,
So for Gim's case, that's part of that is she has a large percentage of out of state donors, and the people at Power Research, to their credit, they have done a lot of research on individual donors and tag them. But out of state donors, they're less likely to see them multiple times, and they're less likely to get tagged. Um, you know, I mean, Gim's most of her support, the biggest chunk is coming from teachers. Like that's her base. Whether or not the campaign finance report says it, like that, is got to be the largest chunk. I mean, especially considering the independent expenditures on her behalf as well.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Interestingly, Alan Dom, if you take Alan Dom's donations out of his his finance report, he's still mostly supported by union real estate and building industry folks. Not unions, sorry. Real estate is accounts for 35% of his campaign finance report without him in it.
Yeah, and that tracks with what I know without even looking at it. It is, it's the Realtors Association, like the Builders Association, like lots of those groups lined up in a big way behind him. And I recognize, a lot of the names as developers and whatnot that are
Mm-hmm.
supporting it.
Um,
You know, it's funny when you mentioned that you saw like the establishment lining up behind Parker. I saw in the last batch of campaign finance reports that Ori Feibush gave her $9,000. I was just like, ooh, it's like between that and the Kenny endorsement, I'm like, man, I don't know.
Yeah, Parker's been my least favorite candidate for a number of reasons, but those are all, both additional good reasons to not like a Parker candidacy, even though
I mean, I also want to be clear, like, I think Parker is going to win, you know, and I think she would be best at the job, not necessarily that she is my favorite candidate.
right, right,
That's just a slight distinction, but
yeah. I mean, it's an important distinction though.
yeah, I mean, I if I would have had my way, I would have preferred that MQS made it to the end. She would be the candidate I would have been
She would
supporting.
be a real, and it to her point, she just did not do as well in fundraising as any of the other candidates. To my point, online, and I actually got blocked by one of the politicos on Twitter for this. But a lot of the things the GIM campaign is taking credit for as accomplishments of Helen Gim as a council member are actually MQS, Maria Canunez Sanchez efforts in the initial uh, billing, and then were taken over by GIM. Um, and
Hmm.
I've always been impressed by how willing Maria Quinones Sanchez is to let somebody else have credit for an effort when she's the one that basically set it up and made it work. Um, but yeah,
That that speaks to her character. I think it's more important to her that things get done than that she gets to slap her name on it. And that's part of the reason I support her. The main reason is just that she is well beloved in her community, and she's really delivered, on those people. Unfortunately, her fundraising woes are because her district is not a wealthy district, and her support is largely amongst the immigrant community, and the fresh immigrant community that has not had a chance to establish wealth yet.
right, right. All right.
And I mean,
Go
she
ahead.
she was also I mean, she's not a born and raised Philadelphian. She came here when she was, I think, one or two, but she has spent, the overwhelming majority of her life in our city, and I would say she is a true Philadelphian.
I don't know. I always wonder, like, when you get to the Philadelphia in your blood arguments, I always wonder about it, like what value it has. Maybe because I'm not from anywhere in specific, but um, I always wonder what value it has because um, I don't think that Parker would make a better mayor than Maria Canunez Sanchez just because she's been here an extra year of her life or something like that. And I don't think that it actually provides any. What it might provide uh, to your argument is some more of the connections that allow people to get things done. Because Philadelphia is a very interdependent city. Like it takes knowing people. Um, but
Well, I mean, I think it gives them, unique perspective on certain things. Like, you know, Parker and MQS, both went to school in Philadelphia. No, none of the other candidates, went to school here, to as far as I know. So that gives them a perspective on the education system that the other candidates don't have. And they've had to utilize like the healthcare services and the public services available in their neighborhoods. And that's Helen Gim growing up in Ohio, Reinhardt growing up in Abington. They don't have the same perspective with that. And honestly, as wealthy people who live in or around Center City, they don't have the same experience as I mean, they're not poor people, they're upper middle class people, but people who actually live out in the deep neighborhoods of the city. I mean, I think that's more what being from Philadelphia is about, and the value it provides is the perspective of what our citizens face on a regular basis.
Um, I would say yes, but also anybody who's spent more than, 3 or 4 years in a city uh, has a valid and valuable current perspective on it. I'd say it's more important where they've lived for the past 5 years than the past 35 years. Uh, you know.
Well, in that case, Reinhardt's been holed up in a nice safe corner of Center City.
Yes, she has, and that does it is actually part of the problem. Like a part of a perspective problem. All of her perspectives come from reading and researching, and not necessarily from having lived it. Gim as well. She has friends in the city, and she spends a lot of time here, but she doesn't. She's holed up in a nice, safe house as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what the actual. Actually know where most of our politicians live, but I never bothered to figure out where Gim lives. You can just download her disclosure report; it's right there. But uh, no, I mean, I always just assumed it was somewhere in or near Center City.
Yeah, and Parker lives in her neighborhood, which is still, a disadvantaged neighborhood. MQS lives in her neighborhood, which is still a disadvantaged neighborhood. All the
Unless you're Janie Blackwell, you actually have to live in your district to represent it.
yeah. That's what I was bringing up. Oh, and again, we're at large, so they don't have to live in any specific district.
Yeah, although Dave, he without getting too specific, he lives in the Cobbs Creek neighborhood,
Yep,
which is also a historically disadvantaged neighborhood.
yep.
You know,
He was saying on this show how he's experienced a lot of the problems with over policing himself directly. He's had times where he's had seven cops draw down on him for no particular reason, and been pulled over and or been arrested for not anything, not actually breaking the law, but you know just being in the wrong
just
place at the
just
wrong
be,
time.
yeah. I mean, that's I take him at his word that he's experienced more than his fair share. I mean, my experience as a white man is a little bit different. Only once have I had the Philadelphia police just jump up on me out of nowhere. Because I was just riding my bike and they, swarmed me. But it was very unnerving, and I can only imagine how that would affect people if it happened to them on a semi-regular basis. That would be very, very disconcerting.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts? I want to wrap up and
Yeah, I guess final thought would be for all our listeners. I don't care who you vote for. Just I would encourage you to get out there and vote. Make your voice heard.
yep, I think so too. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Um, I don't know what next Tuesday holds. I hope next Tuesday we come up with a candidate that will actually be happy to vote for. And or like it will actually it one of the other things I hope is that after next Tuesday, the general election does have a good set of debates, even though it's a relatively foregone conclusion that David O isn't going to win. I would like to see, debates where David O has his say and where people, learn more about what kind of candidate he is, and also he has the ability to bring up questions about the whatever Democratic candidate there is and whatever independent candidate there is. Um,
I would like that too, but that is a highly unlikely outcome. We
it
might
is.
get we might get one debate that will not be televised on a major network.
Well, I don't know. If it's Gim, I doubt I'll be able to get her on this show. But if it's any other candidate, hopefully I'll be able to get both of them on this show and have them debate either virtually or in person. Um,
No, I'd love to see that. I'd also add that no matter who wins, at least for hopefully one term, we're going to have someone who actually wants to be mayor.
yeah,
As
yeah. Yeah, that's an
because man,
important part of the job. You can't really get the job done if you don't want to be there.
no, Kenny is counting those days. He's as second his primary is over. That transition team is going to hand over the keys to City Hall, and he's going to go back down to Maryland and drink wine and eat crabs.
I mean, more power to him. I sometimes want to do that, but hey, I'm only a broadcaster. I don't need to worry about whether or not I want to be here to do this job.
Nice. Well, thank you for having me. And again, I'm sorry I had to miss the first half of the show,
No
but
worries.
thank you for your flexibility.
No worries, and I appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate your perspective, and let's talk again after Tuesday. We can do some post game analysis and talk about the general. Um, all
Looking
right.
forward to it.
See you then. And thank you to my audience. Thank you for tuning in as you do every week. And or if you've never seen the show, thank you for joining us for the first time. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I know it was a little long, but there's a lot going on. And I hope we've brought you an interesting perspective. I found it interesting. I hope you do too. If you'd like to see more, feel free to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or Facebook, or add us to your friends list on Twitter or Twitch. We are on all those platforms every week. You can also watch us in our independent remote player, which is available on our Twitter feed, and also if you just tune in on Wednesday mornings, it will go live automatically. Um, Feel free to tune in next Wednesday, where we'll be talking in post about the primary. We'll try and see if we know who will be the next mayor of Philadelphia. And we'll talk a little bit about the general election, what's about to happen, that kind of thing. We'll also talk about other current events and news. Hopefully, we'll bring you some arts information as well. But yeah, tune in again next week and enjoy the rest of your week, everybody. Have a great week.